listening to the Orchestra Teacher Podcast. Welcome to the Orchestra Teacher Podcast. This is Dr. Charles Laux, and I'm really excited to bring you episode number 81 today in January 2025. This is the first episode of the new year, and really excited to introduce our special guest. This is Mr. Thomas Chen, who is the orchestra director at Carmel High School in Carmel, Indiana. Thomas, welcome to the Orchestra Teacher Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, sir. We got to talk a little bit more at Midwest, which was super nice. I know, but before then, we kind of knew each other a little bit, but we didn't have a whole lot of interaction. And then we met with a group for dinner, and we had some pizza, and it was fantastic in Chicago. So, just really enjoyed your performance there. And
thank you.
So congratulations. It was a phenomenal full orchestra performance that they did. So tell us a little bit about you and your background and kind of where you're from and your training and your career so far, because you've done some amazing things.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in central Indiana, born in Indianapolis. And so I went to school in Indianapolis. And then in my sixth grade year, I actually moved to Carmel Middle School.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't know you were actually in that system.
Yeah. So I'm an alumni of Carmel High School.
Fantastic.
And just like a brief aside, like, Suhan did become my high school orchestra teacher my junior year of high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And it basically, and we can talk about this more in a bit, but basically it's like a lot of full circle type of things now that I'm back at teaching at Carmel High School. And obviously he's one of the biggest reasons why I'm teaching at all. But anyway, so
of course. I think a lot of us are inspired by Sue, and he's just amazing.
Right. So I went to undergrad at DePaul University with a W, not the L in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
But the W in Greencastle, Indiana. It's a really small liberal arts school. So I graduated in 2013. And then the first job I took was actually out in the Houston area.
Oh, great.
South of Houston in Pasadena ISD.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught 3 years down there before moving back to teach at Carmel.
Did you teach high school or middle school there?
So my very first job was teaching at a 7-8 campus.
Got it.
And then that was my very first year, I should say. And then immediately I realized like I was way in over my head on that. And then I moved as an assistant director at Dobie High School, which is still in the same school district.
Okay.
And then I taught 2 years at that high school.
Great.
Yeah.
So you say way over your head. Is it just the number of kids, or is it just not? Is middle school not your thing? Or everybody has their favorite, their niche, that they think that they're best at.
Yeah. So I think like at the time I thought like, man, I cannot handle this age group of kid. Yeah. And like I back then I had more of this idea of like permanence in terms of the types of jobs that we might want, Mm-hmm. So back then I was like, this is definitely not for me. And luckily there were openings in the district. Now I will say that year of teaching, actually those 3 years that I was teaching down there, it's hard to believe that was such a small sliver of my career, because in my like heart, it feels like it was, over half of my career. Just because of how much I learned from a lot of my mentors and colleagues down there, and just like learned from the experience, because it was a Title I school district, which is very different from what I grew up with.
Sure.
And so just that experience alone was one of those over my head moments.
Yeah, it's very eye-opening.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that was not even. I think like I realized that was the part I could actually learn how to do. And that part actually made me a better teacher, I think, overall.
Great.
And that's one of the defining things in my career. But at the time, I don't know. I just like, I constantly asked my mentors and like directors from other campuses to like come watch me teach, and then like watch them teach my kids if they could. Yeah. And I was really lucky. I had, I'm just going to name, I mean, these are people that I really appreciate, and I haven't seen some of them in years or talked to them, some of them in years, but if they happen to see this, like, I'd like them to know.
Yay.
So Alice McCoy was an orchestra director teaching in the 5-6 campus that fed into my 7-8 campus. And part of my teaching duties was to assist her there. Cool. And she's, at the time and is now still a wonderful and experienced teacher. So I knew I could rely on her. So she would do that for me. And I was really, really grateful. And then George Crandall was the high school feeder. And I would ask him to do the same thing sometimes. And they were so helpful and really, really nurturing. But then, when I really asked, like, okay, come on, like, tell me exactly what I need to do.
Be frank, be straight up with me on this, right? Because it's easy for teachers to go, yeah, you did a good job, but when you really hear it, you want to hear it because you want to get better.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And so in that first year, first of all, I wouldn't have survived at all without them. I learned so much about teaching, just period. But within that first year, I just really felt like I could not do that job justice, so I felt it was okay for me to move because I wanted them to find somebody who was able to stay there, a little bit long term.
Got it.
And do a much better job than I was doing. So I was really happy to find that the assistant director position at within the district. Mm-hmm. Because I felt like I could keep learning and growing there, but there were a couple other people there to just make sure everything's still running like it should while I was still learning,
That's fantastic. Having mentors like that. I relate similar to my first years when I was in Las Vegas, and, Mark Laycock was one of my first mentors, my second year teaching. And he came to my classroom like, who's this guy? And oh my gosh, like just life-changing, career-changing, just watching him teach, learning from him. So I'm right with you. The mentors make everything.
Yeah. So that was those first 3 years. I met a lot of friends there and everything. And that was just a really big part of my career and in my heart. Mathematically, it's a sliver now, and it becomes a smaller and smaller sliver. Wow.
Yeah, but so, the first years are very impactful, and they can make or break you, really, honestly. There's a lot of teachers who will start out and have a terrible experience, maybe in the wrong situation, or just not supportive colleagues or not supportive admin. And then they leave the profession and they didn't really get a chance to have a good experience. So it sounds like, that was a learning time for you. And now, so then after you were in Texas, you moved to Indiana?
Yep. When Sue was still at Carmel at that time. And then he was, that was when he was going to go and get his master's in conducting. Mm-hmm. Doctorate.
The doctorate. That's right.
Right. That's right. So they were looking for somebody to, not really like, they weren't looking for somebody to like lead the program per se, but they wanted somebody who had a specific skill set to at least take over those courses that he was doing. So like the really, high level symphony orchestra stuff. And so they were looking around and it was actually, I'm just going to be, I don't know how much of this like people want to hear about or not. Because like kind of behind the scenes, I was actually really fortunate because I don't think they would have seen me as an option, even though they knew me and I had like my foot in the door in that way. But they have a lot of respect for their kids and a lot of respect for their jobs. So somebody with my little bit of experience, even though I knew them, they wouldn't have really considered me. But I was just really fortunate because my spring break, I think the year before Sue was going to leave, I just emailed them, was like, hey, can I come observe and like whatever? And it's like, yeah, sure. And then Sue, being such a nice guy, he was like, Tom, why don't you at this symphony rehearsal prepare like this part of this score, and just like I'll I'll sit back and I'll give the comments, but you can conduct them through those sections.
Nice.
You know.
And what piece? Do you remember what piece it was?
I do. Oh, actually, it was 2. Okay. So they were working on Candide Overture.
Wow.
And they were working on the Tchaikovsky 5 finale.
Okay, so like really easy pieces, easy scores to.
Oh yeah. And like, of course, I had like really no idea what I was doing in terms of score prep and study, and I did my best with all of that. But yeah, so that spring break where I got to do that, and he let me lead a little bit of that, and then he was like, you know what, Tom, like you're here for the week, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm just visiting family. And he was like, why don't you take just like teach the classes that I would teach for like a couple of days, you know? So there was, I think, a freshman class maybe, and you know, they had the pieces of music or whatever. And I just taught the way that I had come to learn to teach. Right.
Oh, sure.
And I think that, well, I hope that what they saw was like, wow, like, you know, we know Tom and look at all this potential he's got, you know, like he's learned all this and whatever. And like, so they must have liked what they saw a little bit, because they called me to ask me to apply for that vacancy, that upcoming vacancy.
Nice. You're in the right place at the right time, and you know, with the right people. And obviously, if you did a poor job on those days, they probably wouldn't have said anything. So,
right, and that's
good job.
That's what I tell myself, and I think there are a lot of instances in our career or in our profession, I should say, where we can, like, outside looking in, we can look to see like, okay, that person got that thing with that foot in the door. Right. In, I want to say the majority of the cases, like, while the optics don't necessarily always look great, right? I would want to say in the majority of the cases, there is something there to back it up. Otherwise it still wouldn't have happened.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's a key thing with younger people. I mean, one of the things that I hate the most is when like people come talk to me, and like I feel like they want something from me, you know, and so they want to get to know me, but like I get the feeling that they're just trying to collect me as a person so that they have this Rolodex of like names to drop and whatever, and like for opportunities and whatever. And I don't like that. So I don't tend to do that myself. Which is why, like, actually, I always joke about this, but I think it's pretty real. Like when people see like, oh, Carmel High School is going to play at Midwest, nobody knows who I am, right? They just find out incidentally once they go to the performance, and they're like, oh, that's who teaches there. But it's always, it always, and it still is, I think, in our profession, like, hey, isn't that the high school that Dr. Sue Han worked at? Oh my gosh, isn't he amazing? And like, he's over here, and he did this All-State over here, is so amazing. I'm like, yeah, that's the reason why I'm here, actually. You know? Yeah. But anyway,
it's interesting when the school has a reputation, because I feel like my school at Lassiter has that reputation for the band, because in their heyday there were like 300 plus people in the band, and they did, you know, BO nationals. It was a huge program. I mean, it's still great, still a good program, but their reputation is well known, you know, because of what they did, you know, a while back, and it's upheld its reputation. So. When I say Lassiter, like, oh, that band, I'm like, no, I want it to be that orchestra, but hopefully someday they'll say, oh, that orchestra.
But that's pretty similar to Carmel, right? Because like if we're starting to talk to band people, that they're really just, oh, that band, you know, with the BOA Grand Nats and everything. And I'm like, hey, like we have a pretty nice orchestra program too.
It's not too shabby.
Right. And actually, funnily enough, depending on what, I guess, area in the country you do choir, like our choir program is also like, I sometimes feel like our choir program is also like just out there and more well known than us, specifically show choir.
Oh, okay.
So there are parts of the country I found out, like Texas, they don't. I thought show choir was like an everyone thing.
No, we don't have big show choirs in Georgia. That's not what we do here.
Like I found that out when I moved to Texas, and I you know, people didn't know. Well, it's not they didn't know what show choir was. They just didn't know how hard they go, you know?
Right. Yeah, right.
So depending on what, even choir people, they're like, oh, that's where that show choir is, right? And I'm like, yeah, but like the orchestra too, you know?
Right.
Come on.
we gotta fight for our programs a little bit and toot our horns a little bit, because you we do great things. How many students are in the orchestra program at Carmel?
So right now we have 240 string students.
Okay.
With 3 full-time directors, which we're very fortunate for. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I think, like, let's just be real honest here on this podcast, right? Let's let the viewers know everything. The reality is, like, we don't have 240, and it's always been that way, and we had 3 directors, right? There was a period of time where we really had a lot more in the 300 to 350 even range.
Okay.
And for those people who are still thinking about, like, okay, what impact maybe has COVID had on my numbers? Like, you can see our program, while we're lucky, our administration and everyone are really supportive and willing, like, we're not fearful for our jobs or anything like that.
Right.
They're willing to accept, like, a dip in numbers and let us kind of rebuild these numbers. And maybe for the listeners out there, it would be heartening to know that even at our program in a very affluent district, we're still sitting there trying to think of those solutions of, like, okay, how are we not connecting with those incoming 8th grade classes? Or in this case, like, there are certain classes that there's just way fewer kids signed up, depending on when they started their instrument.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, we're about to be five years in, which is kind of crazy from COVID. And, but that still does filter on up, especially the high school level. I'm starting to see next year, my number's going to go up some. Our 8th grade numbers are pretty big at both of my feeders, and I'm going to see some growth, but it's taking a little while.
Yeah, it's really interesting looking at those numbers, because our current senior class is just, way smaller than usual. And it's interesting, like, to trace back to, like, okay, when did COVID hit? When after COVID, we did like a hybrid situation. So we saw half the kids on one day and then the next half the other day. And we're already on block schedule. So, like, we would see some kids, like, once a week. I think.
That's terrible.
Yeah. So thinking about these current seniors, I'm pretty sure, well, no, they would have been that year, that hybrid year, they would have been in 8th grade then, I think. And so just getting them, there could be a lot of reasons why a ton of them just dropped, and just looking through those numbers is kind of interesting. So anyway, speaking, this is kind of, sorry, I'm just kind of, like, they're just random tangents.
This is all great stuff, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are still dealing with COVID and also career choices and getting jobs or not getting jobs. There's a lot of people out there that are thinking about these things. So this is fantastic.
Well, it's just really, so, like, I did some studying before coming on, because I've known about the podcast, but, like, I'm sorry to say, Charles, I was not an avid listener.
It's okay. It's something that I do and put out there, and some people use it and some people don't. And it's fun.
Well, for me, I've known, and it was just like, I'm going to put this on my list of things to listen to. And then I really never would get around to it. But then I was, like, going on, and I was like, I better start watching some of these. So obviously I started with 2 of my very good friends, Heather Nieto and Nicole DeGuire, who I also work with, of course.
That's right.
I started with them, and then I was like, oh, who else is, like, fancy and new and, like, here? So of course I saw, like, the David Eccles one.
Yeah, that was fun.
And then I found Sue's, and I was like,
it was one of my early ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So I clicked on it, and then you guys started talking, and I was like, I wonder at what point this was taking place. And then you started talking about contact tracing, and I had all this, like, oh God, I don't want to relive this. Yeah. So unfortunately I never finished that one, because as soon as the contact tracing came up, I was like, this was happening during COVID.
Yeah. I probably need to get Sue back on here so we can talk about some real new content and all the great things he's doing.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I can't agree or disagree, because I stopped within 5 minutes. It's like, maybe you did, I don't know, but I just couldn't relive, some of that.
Oh, for sure.
So it's like,
it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, but it's a great podcast.
Oh, thanks.
And I kind of appreciate the fact that you don't do the like, share, subscribe thing.
Not too much. No, I mean, people will do it if they want. And there are some people out there just, they don't listen to podcasts. It's just not their thing, and that's fine.
Yeah. Well, let me be the one to say it to the listeners then. You guys should like, share, and subscribe.
There you go.
So there you go.
How funny.
And then I'll do the same.
So this is fantastic. What are some of your, I don't know, you guys play some amazing repertoire, but, and I don't know how many orchestras you have. You have 3 or 4 levels of orchestra or more. How does it
so
work
it's kind of 7 levels, kind of.
Okay.
So, and again, like it, so some of the class sizes have gotten smaller down to like 30, 35. So,
that's like what a lot of people have at high school, and that's normal.
Oh, okay. Well, then never mind. I shouldn't have said that. Cut that part out.
But that's, I mean, you have a thing that's been, part of your program, and that's I mean, are you guys normally like 60, 50, 60?
Like, so for that top group that you saw at Midwest, that can get up to 50 or 60 strings, or it had like pre-pandemic. What you saw on stage was probably closer to 45, maybe something like that.
Yeah. Good number.
Still sizable. It's fine. Like they do fine.
They sounded great.
Yeah. And then like the next level down is, again, pre-pandemic was more 50 to 60. And I think they're a little larger. I think they are like 50-ish off the top of my head. I think. And then, it's just a bunch like in the 40s and 30s from there. Yeah. And so our setup is 7 classes. We have 2 9th grade only classes one is like our non-audition 9th grade. And the other one is like the advanced one where they had to audition to get in.
Great.
And then we have our non-audition 10th through 12th grade orchestra. And then we have our lowest audition 10th through 12th orchestra. And then it gets really weird from there. So if you're keeping track, we're at 4 right now. The one above that is called Philharmonic, and they'll actually sometimes perform as I should say in the spring semester, they'll perform as a full orchestra as well.
That's nice.
And that class is actually 9 through 12. Like the really advanced 9th graders can make it into that one.
Yep.
And then the one above that is Symphony Orchestra, which is like the course in terms of like my class periods. That course is actually half of what you saw on stage at Midwest.
Wow. Okay.
So it's like 25-ish string players, and that Symphony Orchestra, again, like 9 through 12 can audition into and those are like, if 9th graders make it, they're really advanced.
Sure.
And then we have another orchestra, Carmel Orchestra, which is above that, which is the other half, I should say, of that full orchestra strings. And again, 9 through 12. So, and those are like the very, very top, the very most advanced kids in our program. What
percentage would you say of your students, of the 240 or so, take private lessons?
The funny thing is I should probably keep better stats on that, but I don't. I would say if we're including like everybody, it's probably, half is a conservative estimate.
Wow. Okay. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And then, so if we're talking in the very upper level groups, like Camerata, Symphony, Philharmonic, probably pretty much everyone in there is taking private lessons or took a substantial amount when they were in middle school, early high school.
Yeah. I have some of those that got good skills as, at the younger age, and they've been able to maintain and kind of do some things on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing that I try to remind people, and like, I know people will hear this and they're like, yeah, but I hear all the really affluent good schools say this. And like, I need it to be real. Okay. So I also teach that lowest freshman class. And I really love teaching that class. And I've learned a lot about teaching that class, especially about sequencing, because, so a lot of those kids really don't have much skill coming into high school still. So identifying like, what is the next step for them? Like for our fall concert, we're still programming grade 1 music with them, grade 2 music. And pretty much throughout the school year, actually, we don't really break into much higher than grade 2 with them.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of like open string exercises. We do a lot of those just fundamentals with them to help build those skills.
Yeah.
And And so sometimes people like, and I get this when I talk to people a lot, they'll talk about like, well, what are you playing at the high school with like your lower level groups? And I say these pieces, whatever. And they're like, wait, those aren't really high school pieces though. And I'm like, there's not really such a thing as a high school piece and a middle school piece.
I mean, my youngest group will play some pieces similar to what the advanced middle school groups will play, and it just because the middle schools in my district, or at least, are all grade based, so they don't get a chance to mix grades at the middle school. And then when they come up to the high schools, a lot of the more advanced kids will audition up, and then you have your group of kids who some of them struggle and some of them didn't audition, but they should have probably. So at least you have some leadership, but it's definitely a similar thing where you it's not middle school music, but some people might say that it is.
Right. Because like what service am I doing to these kids if they have no business playing like the grade 3 or 4?
Yeah, for sure. No,
right.
It's not right. It's not fair to the kids. It's not fair to the people listening. It's not going to make them better. It's just they're going to hack away at it, and you're trying to build skills and build foundations,
Yeah. I mean, and the kids should be able to like listen back to their performances and be like, oh, that sounds pretty good. There should be no caveat of like, that sounds good for school age kid orchestra. Like it should just sound good in the end,
And that's why there's different levels of music, I mean,
right.
Yeah. And that's why we have such great educational music written. There's a whole bunch of new stuff that I just love. That's new composers and new publishers, and really expanding the whole repertoire. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's like it's really interesting that I think there is, or at least when I was growing up through middle school, high school, and I was like less advanced, back then. And then we would get programs of like arrangements of Mozart, arrangements of and I'm not going to knock those, like they're fine, but in terms of like the newer music, educational music being written, I don't know that we need to go to those wells very much anymore, because the writing that happens in most of the educational level music nowadays, they do a much better job of incorporating about even levels throughout the orchestra,
right?
Especially for like cello bassists,
right? I mean, you look at Mozart stuff, that arrangements, it's D D D D D D D D. It's like that's the cello part,
Yeah,
it's not good. Yeah,
so I mean, and I wouldn't mind programming some of that in order to expose them to that style literature, but I would only really feel good about it if I knew everyone could handle it pretty readily, because I would not want to have to sit there and woodshed and grind. Because again, cello basses are playing D D D D. Like they should just experience the musicality of it, which means that they would really need to have the technique down. And that's the only way I'd feel pretty good about something like that in a limited rehearsal time. And then I knew they could just get it. Right.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Well, and then, so what are some of do you have some like favorite go-to pieces for that younger group? Because I know a lot of our groups probably can't play the Candide or some of those bigger pieces, but do you have some like go-tos or things that you're working on now that you really like that are in that grade 1, 2, or 3 range that a lot of us would be able to access?
Yeah. So in terms of like grade 1, I really like the Red Lion.
Okay.
I think Wolstenholme, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason, and I look for pieces like this, it's where they're grade 1, but they use all 1-2 finger pattern. Because I think that we have some trouble when in literature, when the publishers are like, okay, composers, you can use up to this for grade 2 music.
Yeah.
Or grade 1 music. And if the 1-2 finger pattern is like a no-go in grade 1 music, then as soon as you have a grade 2 piece and you're introducing that 1-2 finger pattern, but then you also have these other grade 2 rhythms and orchestration and ranges, like suddenly you've compounded all these harder skills all at once, right?
Yeah.
And so pieces like Red Lion I love so much because like the rhythms and everything are pretty simple still, as you would see in a grade 1. And the only new difficult thing for them is like, okay, I got to play 1-2 pattern. but they're not mixing finger patterns. It's just that the whole time.
Sticks with one. Yeah. And that's a great way of sequencing things, is that concept of one new concept at a time, whether it's a left-hand technique or a right-hand technique or something like that. One new thing at a time, I think, is the way that kids will learn best and be able to reinforce those skills. So that's fantastic. It's a cool piece. I'll check it out.
Yeah. Another one, I think it's already really popular, but Brian Balbange's A Beethoven Lullaby.
Okay. I've seen it. I haven't performed it, but tell us a little bit about it. Is it does it use what is the main theme from Beethoven in there?
It uses Ode to Joy.
Oh, Ode to Joy. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And it's slow enough. Actually, you don't necessarily recognize it right off the bat unless you're like kind of paying attention. But it's a very expressive piece.
Nice.
And it's all 2/3 patterns in that one. And it's mostly, honestly, quarter notes and half notes, I think. There's barely any eighth notes. Okay. But there's just so much potential for playing musically. And really, give them the music and have them learn the notes like within the first week, and then just focus on expressivity. And teaching, like, I don't know, teaching legato bow strokes is so hard. I don't even actually bother talking about real legato with the younger kids. I still focus on just a standard détaché bow stroke. Mm-hmm. Because even though you might hear, like up close, you might hear that small bow click in between the changes, really, like with 40 kids on stage out in the hall, it all kind of goes away.
It blends a little bit,
yeah. And like, since I still need them to work on that connected détaché bow stroke, that's really all I do with them on that. Mm-hmm. And then it has a really nice like build and climax to it. So I don't know. I think it's a pretty simple piece that has a lot of potential for expressivity. And like for me, it's like when you're giving a piece of music and when you're rehearsing, the bulk of what you're trying to get the kids to do and learn is like playing musically, playing expressively. And we should try to avoid giving the pieces where we have to woodshed for them and tune notes and constantly tell them like, oh, actually we're playing with this finger instead of that finger, and really spoon feeding notes. For me, that's like a telltale sign of I overprogrammed, is if I'm doing that a lot. And if I never get an opportunity to really explore musicality.
Yeah. It's definitely an issue. And, there's always an expectation that this group should be doing this and this group should be doing this. And you're in this grade, so you should be playing this repertoire. But I think you're right. And I feel like I'm always struggling with that balance of is this going to challenge them, but is it over their heads, or is this too easy and they're really going to be bored and they're not going to be motivated to practice it? So those are some things that I'm always trying to think about and struggle with. What are some of the things that you do to when you're selecting repertoire? What are some of the things you look at first, I guess?
For the younger level kids, I'll look at finger patterns. So some people will say keys, right? And that's actually that can be a red herring because they're I don't know if you know. I want to say his name is Tanner Otto.
Yeah, from Ohio State.
Yeah, that's right. That's actually where I got this piece, Sun Chasers.
Okay.
It's technically in A, like according to the key signature, but if I remember that piece correctly, it's all 2/3 patterns still.
Okay. So it's on the right string, and then there's accidentals where there needs to be accidentals, maybe.
Right, exactly. So so I look at finger patterns, which means I really have to look at the score to get that. Finger patterns. Usually I don't have to worry about meters too much in that level, because usually that's already self-selected out. It's probably 4/4, 2/4, 3/4, something like that.
Right.
And then I look in terms of rhythms. I think there's actually a lot bigger of a jump in terms of like the kids' ownership. when we're talking about like just things that are on the beat versus things that are off the beat. So even dotted quarter eighth rhythm, I consider to be like pretty difficult depending on how it uses, how the composer uses it. And so I'll look out for like the types of rhythms that are being used. The orchestration for younger level of music, I look for more blocked orchestration where parts are doubled a lot.
Cool.
And then I always look at the cello bass part to make sure that at some point they get the melody or something. I was going to say, and also the viola part, but then like part of me is like, wait, I think I might have forgotten to do that this past time.
It does happen.
And I play viola, so I feel bad. But,
no.
Oops. But I just making sure that all the instrument groupings get decent parts and they're not sitting for 30 measures of rest just to play a whole note, that type of stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, I think when I was younger, I was like, oh, this is in D major, perfect. But then the violas are playing on the C string the whole time, and the G string when they're having to do the 3/4 pattern, and you hear a whole bunch of pieces out there that are in D major, and the violins sound great, and the violas and the second violins, the C sharps or F sharps, the high threes are not good,
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I have a funny. I'm not going to say this out who this was because I don't think this piece is released yet. But when you're going through the Midwest process, like composers will send out
everything,
all this music to consider, and some of it will be pre-published. So it's stuff that they would fast track to publish if you decided to play. But otherwise we'll just go in the schedule. So there was a composer who sent me his stuff, and I was looking through, and there was this beautiful grade 1 piece that was again expressive, and I loved it in all the same ways that I love a Beethoven lullaby. As I was looking through, there were 2 measures where the violas had the 3/4 pattern on the C string, like just 2, and I was like, this will be a grade 1 expressive, like everyone's gonna play this thing, except like we'll get to those 2 bars, and because suddenly it's not really grade 1 anymore. Suddenly,
right? Yeah.
So then I actually I felt so strongly about this because I really want to play the piece at some point. I actually emailed him and I was like, hey, this one's pre-published and I don't know if you could, do this now. And then I pointed out those measures and I was like, maybe consider changing it, but also I don't want to be that guy, right?
But you were.
But I was, but maybe consider changing it. And he was very nice and he was like, oh, you know what? Yeah, sure. And then he's changed it. And I just looked for it because I was like, ooh, maybe I should program that. But it hasn't been released yet. Okay. So someday, if people remember that we had this conversation about this piece, and if they're wondering what that piece is in the future, they can email me, I guess, and I'll let them know. But at the moment, it's not published yet. So, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I love it. Lots of great info here. Lots of great ideas, and just very, very careful thought process. So that's awesome.
Well, and I don't like it that maybe we earned this reputation, but there are some schools that everyone's like, oh, I saw them at Midwest and whatever, and their top group is amazing, and this and that, and I don't want people to think of me as like a semi maestro, oh wow, like a conductor of that
watch his magic,
fancy, and wow, I study pedagogy deeply, I'm going to workshops and stuff to learn that stuff, and I care deeply about those younger kids, and I think very carefully about how we teach them, and that's actually transferred over the upper level kids. For the first few years while I was teaching at Carmel, I had a tough time deciding what kind of technique building things I would do with them. And I still kind of have to think about it. So 3-octave scales were a no-brainer, right. But other than that, it was I would do 3-octave scales and then I was and then we just rehearse music. But even with that level, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job as a teacher if I weren't adding some value, So I could add value musically in the rehearsal process, but I should be able to add value in their technique too, in tandem with what they're learning with their private teachers and everything. So I found the off the string bow strokes, even advanced kids really do not have enough mastery over spiccato and sautille. And so we do a lot of open string exercises on just developing those, just like playing open D and at different tempos, spiccato and sautier. And then we use the Habits book, Chris Obey Habits book.
Great book.
And unfortunately, I mostly just use like a few pages in it. And one of the ones that I love so much is the Velocity Etudes page, which is page 6, exercise 20.
How the kids know it now.
Yeah, exactly.
That's your favorite.
And I've actually, like, I do a variation too. So it just goes through D, E, F sharp, basically is what's written, right? But then you can go up like one more note, like start the pattern one note higher, so that they're working all their fingers. And there's like a strategy with how you manage the bassists and the cellists, where they have to move their first finger up, where the first and seconds, or the violins and violas maybe can just stay in first.
Okay.
So like we do that, and then we combine that with like the sautier and spiccato exercises to be able to develop that coordination, especially sautier, like fast sautier coordination on changing notes while we do that. So those are some things I found with the upper level kids. But this reminds me, I've been meaning to pick the brains of like other people who have to teach this level of kid. I should have said
you have to teach
those kids.
Right. Well, one of the things I've realized, and I thought it takes me back to my undergraduate, but I remember when I was an undergraduate, there was a cellist, I won't say who it is, who was playing for a master class, and he was playing a scale and arpeggio was the first thing he did, and he's going up the scale and comes down and he does it again, and then the clinician said, "Stop! What note are you playing?" And he's like, "I have no idea." He just, all the patterns are there. So I realized that some of my students do that too. Like they can play all the scales because they know the patterns of when to shift and 2-3 shift or 3-1 shift, whatever it might be. And then, but they don't know what notes they're playing. So I do a lot with different scale patterns. So just mixing it up and like going up 2 and down 1 different sequences within the scales. And it's been really, really helpful having kids think about the notes they're playing, the intervals they're playing, coming up with different shifting exercises, because, you can play a scale up and down and you're going to use the same, 4 patterns for violins and viola scales. But when you mix it up and you have ascending and descending or interval skips, or, even like thirds, but even more difficult than thirds, where you're going up 4 notes and down 2 and then up, things like that, mixing it up really helps them understand the fingerboard even better than just up and down. So I really enjoy doing that and challenging my kids with different floor patterns and different sequences.
I'm going to just discreetly write that down.
Go for it.
while I say this next thing, because that's brilliant. That's good stuff.
And I got that actually. I took that from Chris Howes. If you know Christian Howes, the wonderful violinist. Alternative styles, everything guy. And he's been on the podcast too, but he's just his thing is creative string playing. And so he's like, if you want to really know it, you got to mix it up. And I took my students 2 years ago now to Asheville, and it's like, why are you taking a trip to Asheville? Like there's, North Carolina. It's like, there's nothing but breweries and things there. And that's not great for kids. But, Christian Howes lives there, and we did a 4-hour workshop with him, and it was like really life-changing for a lot of my kids, and just inspiring, and just getting them to like realize that they can play without a page in front of them, But that was part of it too. It's just different patterns. If you really want to know your key or whatever it might be, mix up those patterns. And so it was really helpful.
Yeah, and actually that gets to something that I think about a lot, which is that I think the general wisdom with orchestra teachers is, what kind of techniques should I do? And people always invariably answer scales. You got to do scales, and that is like true-ish, right? Because with the way that because I didn't mix up those 3 octave scales, right? Like I just do them exactly, the way that you described, where you're just doing the pattern. And if you really think about it, you're basically practicing kind of the same thing with any key of scale.
Is the same thing. Right. You're just starting on a different pitch, and then again, the kids don't know what letter names they're playing, or
Right. And like they're not building like dexterity or like or anything like that between certain combinations of fingers, right?
Yeah.
Because it's still the same pattern of fingers. So, and that's why I don't tend to overuse scales. And actually, if we're talking about the younger kids, even I don't really like to do scales that much until after I can hear them go string by string and play finger patterns into, because I don't really see a point in like, because some of those scales, depending on what scale you're doing, suddenly you're changing finger patterns across the strings. And for kids who can't play in tune in one finger pattern, that's, you've added again that level of complexity that is unnecessary for their level, right? So, so that's
I just wrote down a note as well. So things that I want to do. Yeah.
Oh, this is productive then. Wow.
Every time I record a podcast, it's productive. I get ideas about something, and sometimes it's procedural, sometimes it's pedagogical, sometimes it's just philosophical. But this is why I love doing it. So selfishly.
Yeah. I mean, and actually, I'm just gonna plug you a little bit in general, I think, because the history of how we know each other is more of a history about how long I've known of you. Oh. Because I was like that kid in the front row of your sessions, writing everything you say down, and I think the first time I saw you do something was probably the first time I went to the OSU string teacher workshop, which was probably 2014, 2015, possibly something like that. And so I would, and then every time, I think I've been back there 5 or 6 times now. And you were at half of them.
Yeah, I was there every year, basically, I think since maybe 2009, because, Bob is my sensei. And the thing I loved about Bob, and I have plans to get him on this podcast too. I'm kind of waiting for a special moment, but he is my sensei. And so what I loved about Bob is he would say, we really need a session about this. And it was a topic that I never thought about creating a presentation for, but I was like, he had confidence in me that I knew enough about it to be able to present it. And, but it just really expanded, my ideas and thoughts, and how do I have to really research this and think about, well, what am I doing on this, whatever topic it is. And, so he would make up topics for me to present on without really asking me. He's like, we want you to do this. Okay. So I love that, and I've grown from it. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I've got to say, and I think we talked about this at dinner at Midwest, and I apologize if I'm misremembering, and it's actually somebody else I talked about this with. But there's there's a lot of people, who are great pedagogy, great teachers, and everything. There's a smaller sliver of those who can present those ideas well. And so when we're going to the Midwest clinic or even just the state conference, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, the delivery matters, right?
Yeah.
And so I do seek out certain people more than others because I see their name, and even if sometimes the topic is something that I'm not entirely interested in, I go ahead and go to those sessions because I feel like I can get more out of them purely because I trust that the presenter has prepared.
Right.
One of the things that I think is bad is the wrong word, but bad is when you see the abstract for the session, and somehow you go there and somehow the presenter never really hits on it.
Right. Yeah. And I think there is some of that, and it's unfortunate, but when regardless of where it is, Ask the Midwest, state conferences, whatever it is, NAFME, that they read a proposal and they're like, oh, this is a really good proposal. It's well written, but to be able to take that and present it and keep an audience awake and do all that, that's kind of a challenge, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll be Bob Gillespie here. Maybe you should do a session on that.
Oh, on presenting?
On presenting. It'll be a real Inception kind of thing.
How to present. Yeah. No, and I think sometimes it's just personality, and sometimes it's experience too. I mean, my first presentation was in 2003, and my colleague, Brian Hellick down in Orlando said, hey, this is when, the internet was still relatively new, and web apps and things like that and tools were starting to come into play. And he's like, we should do we should do a session at FMEA, Florida Music Educators. I'm like, I've never ever done this before. Why? Like, so I went along with it, and he got me started. That was my first real presentation, which was really cool. And just from then, it just kind of went, and I've enjoyed it. And again, people ask questions at when I'm doing a session, and again, I learn from the audience too, learn from the experience of doing it. So, yeah.
I've done some sessions. Actually, I did one at the Indiana Music Educators Association conference when it was all virtual. So I recorded it.
Those are the worst. Those are my least favorite. So hard.
It was really terrible. Because in part because like I'm kind of like, I don't like things that aren't, polished. So the biggest problem was I would record like one sentence at a time because I would say at some point, and I was like, oh God. So I would spend hours just like editing.
I'm bad with and it's something I'm working on.
Yeah, me too. But live, unless you are very consistent, like and where you place the like live, I think most people don't notice anything, right?
Yeah.
And so I would have liked doing that, that session live, but unfortunately, like I don't know, just like in the age of vlogs and where people are used to watching YouTubers, and it's like kind of fast paced,
and they chop like there's no like period at the end of a sentence anymore. It's one into the next, into the next, into the next. So.
In the age of that, I got used to that kind of. And so when I was putting together that session, I was like basically doing that. But then I would spend, and I'm not good at editing or anything like that. So I spent like 10 hours just putting together like a 30-minute presentation.
Yeah, it definitely took a lot longer. Yeah. I spent a lot of time here at this desk doing video editing and all that during COVID and those virtual orchestras and a lot. But I learned a lot.
Yeah. The virtual orchestra thing, I'm so glad I never was talked into doing it. Unless we just spent the money and hired someone to do it for us.
Right.
Because I saw how it was done and I knew that theoretically I could do it, but I just,
it was a lot. It was a lot, and I look back and there's a lot of memories during that time, and it brings back, and you get to see the kids and things, but it's definitely, it's a lot.
Yeah. And I feel bad because there are a lot of those out there that I remember watching, and I feel bad, because at this point, is anyone watching them anymore?
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll dig up those to be like, hey guys, your work was not in vain. I'm here, I'm listening.
Yeah.
But
I did one with, I think about 80 kids.
No.
Yeah. And at one point, you can see I put them all on the screen at once, and they're all tiny, just lined up. And then I had sections, and I went back and forth. So I spent some time, and I learned a lot of, syncing up videos, and oh gosh, it was crazy. It's crazy.
The syncing part to me, just blew my mind. I just couldn't get.
And some kids did not sync up, so that's where you just took the volume slider on their video down because it didn't work. I mean, it did not work.
Yeah,
but you wanted to include them because they spent the time recording it, but they didn't follow the click track, very well, or at all. So
right.
So it's not real orchestra, but
yeah.
Well, anyways, this has been just an awesome conversation, and I look forward to being able to see you. Are you going to be at ASTA this year?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, we'll definitely see you down here in the ATL and in March, and it's been fantastic. But thank you so much for being a great guest. Wish you the best of luck. I know that you recently had some snow. We're about to get a big storm on Friday in Atlanta, and that's going to shut us down. So,
yeah, I distinctly remember. I think Atlanta was similar to this, but in Houston, they were predicting almost freezing temperatures, and I think what you guys are going to get is much worse this time around. But I remember it was 30. They thought it was going to be 32, and it was going to be some precipitation. And because I just didn't understand coming from the Midwest. I was like, why are they going to close school? Right. And then they're like, we don't have salt trucks here. We don't have plows. We don't have any of that. So if any of that does turn to ice, everyone's just skating on the roads. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So
it takes a while to get used to that.
Right. Midwesterners really need to pipe down a little bit because those of you all in the South, they don't keep salt truck stuff.
Yeah.
Like, of course,
we're anywhere between kids have said like 4 to 9 inches. So somewhere in that.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah. So
do they have salt trucks now?
No, we don't have salt trucks. No. So it's gonna be shutting down. And then I had a big orchestra camp at Saturday that I was supposed to do with 8 clinicians and sectionals and rehearsals and sight reading and all this, and I had to cancel the whole thing. So it's a bummer.
Oh, no.
I don't trust that the roads are going to be drivable on Saturday, and I got clinicians coming from all parts of our city, so I wasn't going to put them in danger either. So
that's
what it is. It's where we are, and that's the winter here in Atlanta. But so this will probably go out on our snow day on Friday the 10th. That's when I'm going to post this podcast.
Okay.
So if you're watching it, that's when it came out. But anyways, Tom, so much. Thank you so much. It's been awesome. And for everybody out there at Orchestra Teacher Podcast, this is Dr. Charles Laux and Thomas Chen. Say goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for tuning in. For resources and more information, visit orchestrateacher.net.